We're going to get started here in just a moment. If you wouldn't mind taking your seats. You sit down, start down there. We're just waiting for one more person to arrive, so just going to give it 1 minute. Come on in and have a seat, please, if you want to hear this panel. Okay, welcome everybody. It's good to see you all here for this panel on ocean-based climate solutions and enabling frameworks for action. My name is Brad Ack. I'm the Executive Director of Ocean Visions, and I'm going to start just by setting a little bit of context for this, and then we're going to have a great lineup of panelists to discuss some of the really critical issues and challenges associated with enabling frameworks for action. So I want to just set the context for why we're having this conversation. So we're an oceans organization, and a number of our speakers come from ocean-based backgrounds. So why is the ocean so involved with questions about carbon removal and climate? And the answer is that the climate crisis and the ocean crisis are two sides of the same coin. They are completely inseparable, and we cannot solve the climate problem without the help of the ocean, and we definitely can't restore the health and vitality of the ocean without solving the climate problem. So let me just tell you a little bit more about why I make those statements. The two biggest and underinvested threats to the global ocean are the direct result of too much CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And they are thermal stress and chemical stress. So thermal stress is ocean warming, but it's like a fever that has been growing and growing and growing. And now the ocean is at about over a degree of centigrade warmer. I think it's about 1.2 warmer, just like the atmosphere, warmer than it was before the Industrial Revolution started. This is having an enormous stress effect on the ocean. The amount of heat going into the ocean has been calculated at each year because of the heat that we're trapping, the excess energy we're trapping, has been calculated at 14 zettajoules, which I know nobody's going to know that number, but a joule is like a watt. It's a basic unit of measurement, and zeta means 21 zeros behind it. 21 zeros. That is far more heat than humans produce in all of our activities on the planet each year, and it is creating this giant imbalance in ocean systems. So first, it's accelerating sea level rise because warmer water expands. It is directly connected to deoxygenation of the ocean because warmer water holds less oxygen, and we've seen about a 2% global average reduction in dissolved oxygen levels in the ocean, which is actually not evenly distributed. Some areas are much higher. It intensifies these marine heat waves that we can see and measure coming across the ocean that wipe out coral reefs. And this heat by itself has already been the cause of much of the loss of tropical corals, and if continuing unabated, will wipe out coral reefs on our watch, tropical coral reefs. It also interrupts mixing between the upper and the mid layer of the ocean, where nutrient transfer takes place that feeds the phytoplankton that are at the base and zooplankton that are at the base of our food chain, because the heat trapped layer stops the lower layer waters from moving up, creates more powerful storms. It's increasing the melt of sea ice and the ice sheets because of the warming of the waters where sea ice melts. And we're seeing poleward migration of fish species. So this suite of stresses to the ocean are caused by one thing: too much heat. And there's only one way to turn that equation around, and that is to reduce atmospheric concentrations of CO2. Not to keep increasing them. every bit we keep increasing them, the fever gets higher. And so the net zero by 2050 goal means a significantly higher fever. Just keep that in mind, because we actually need to reset the goal towards restoring the climate and leaving a safe future for all of humanity and all of nature. The second biggest threat is ocean acidification from the climate crisis. 30% of all the CO2 that we've put into the atmosphere has ended up in the upper layer of the ocean, where it is causing, again, a big chemical imbalance and has led to a 30% increase across the board in ocean acidity levels. This has a direct impact on any life form that forms shells, and that is a lot, including the base of the food chain. A number of the plankton species have shells. And so we're sort of rolling the dice here with how acidic can we make the ocean before the ocean begins to turn off the basic primary production pump. And that's a risk that we shouldn't be taking. So is the current action agenda, the 1.5 and net zero by 2050, doing its job? Is it reducing risk to the ocean? Well, we all know that for the most part, greenhouse gas emissions have continued to grow year on year on year, with the exception of the COVID year, 2020. But in 2021, they bumped right back up to record levels. And this is despite 27 meetings of the parties to negotiate reductions. And we also know that it's still 82% of primary energy use. Now, the good news is the number's coming down. The bad news is it's nowhere near fast enough. We're getting there, but arriving too slow is the same as losing. Getting there slowly is exactly the same as losing. This is just in the hair analogy here. And renewable energy is only responsible for about 13% of total power generation. And I'll point out that this figure on renewables includes nuclear and hydro, which many environmental groups would not consider true renewable. So wind and solar are about 7%. So that brings me to carbon removal. All pathways to 1.5, according to the scientific body for the UNFCCC, have said between 100 and 1,000 gigatons of carbon removal over the course of this century. A gigaton is a billion tons. And I had somebody put this in context for me yesterday. The oil and gas industry, on average, in a global year, moves about 5 gigatons of weight in all of the things that they transport. If you take all of the humans on the planet and add up their weight, it's about 0.2 gigatons. We need to be removing 10 gigatons a year by 2030. And right now we're moving very, very little. So there is a clear imperative to figure out, where is this carbon removal going to come from? It's not a question of if we're going to do carbon removal. If we're going to survive on the planet, carbon removal has to happen. So the oceans, what role might the oceans play? Possibly a big role. There's 50 times more carbon, deep blue carbon, in the bottom of the sea in a relatively inert and safe form than there is in the atmosphere. 50 times more, and 20 times more than there is in all of the soil and vegetation on the planet. So this shows that the ocean has tremendous potential, and if we all went away tomorrow, over the next 100,000 years, the ocean would cycle most of this carbon into the deep. It just takes a long time to do it. So our question is, can we do anything to accelerate that process, or all of those processes? So at Ocean Visions, we have developed a series of technology roadmaps around currently 3 big domains of ocean-based carbon removal: electrochemistry, the use of macroalgae, and alkalinity enhancement. And we're just about to add a 4th blue bubble there on microalgae. And then later, early next year, a 5th on blue carbon ecosystems. And that will cover, at least as far as we know, every one of the pathways that the oceans can remove carbon. Each one of these roadmaps lays out what the proposed technologies are and what we know about them, what is their technology readiness level in terms of how developed are they, and what do we need to do to move them forward to answer the basic questions of whether they can contribute to this massive carbon removal mountain that we have to climb together. I want to be clear, we don't know the answer to that question. We do not know how well they can contribute yet and how safe that contribution will be, but we desperately need to accelerate all of our research, development, and testing to answer that question. And that now leads me to our panel, who are all going to talk about different parts of the enabling frameworks nationally and internationally, subnationally, that we're going to have to create in order to begin to answer this question. I'm going to ask people one by one to come up, and I'm going to have each person make an opening statement, and then we'll have a lively discussion. So first, Dr. Susan Lozier of Georgia Tech, the Dean of the College of Sciences. Actually, you could sit, it doesn't matter, but maybe sit this one. And also the president of the American Geophysical Union. And AGU is leading really important work here on ethical frameworks, development of ethical frameworks for the kind of research that we're talking about. And so, Susan, if you could just speak a little bit to why AGU is embarking on the creation of an ethical framework for climate intervention research and development. What do you think it adds to the mix, and how you anticipate it will further help advance ocean-based CDR research and development? Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. It's a pleasure to be here today. I do just want to mention that in addition to my role as the president of AGU, I'm also coming into this space as a physical oceanographer who has studied the ocean's role in climate for the past 30 years. And so I lead an international observing system in the North Atlantic that's concerned with the overturning circulation, and that overturning circulation is largely responsible for the ocean being an anthropogenic sink for CO2. So I wanted to add that in there. As Brad mentioned, we are all aware that the pathway to meeting the Paris Agreement estimates is woefully lacking right now. It looks as though it's going to be very difficult for us to meet those targets. And so there has been a lot of discussion. This panel indeed is centered on the idea, or focused on the idea of what we need to do to move forward for active carbon removal. So I'm going to say at the outset that AGU is really agnostic and is taking no position on any specific climate intervention strategy. But what we are saying is that if research and possible deployment moves forward, there first needs to be an ethical framework developed in order for those researchers, companies that are in this space, that they need to do so, within this framework. There has been for the past 10 or 15 years a call from authoritative bodies such as the United States National Academies of Sciences that have been saying there needs to be this global framework that outlines the ethics and governance that are required for these carbon intervention strategies, but there's been no work to date. There is precedence for ethical frameworks for times when the global community has come face to face with new technologies that have posed potential risk. We can think of genetic modification of crops, we can think of CRISPR technology, we can think of nanotechnology. So there is a precedence for these ethical framework, but nothing has been developed to date in this space. So AGU is stepping into this right now. I like to say that we're picking up the baton from work that has been out there. The the Aspen Institute has been looking specifically at a code of conduct for ocean CDR. And there are other groups that have been working in this space. So we're working with partners to try to say, can we pull together an overarching framework in this space? And what we're focusing on in this ethical framework is making sure that there are different perspectives and multiple voices that are brought to the table, because we're keenly aware that these solutions could have disproportional impacts on different communities around the globe, and so it's important that we are inclusive in the development of this framework. I'm happy to talk more about it later, but I'll just say we're at the start of this, but we understand there's such an urgency about this. And even though it's a very difficult task, given the urgency, we don't really want to back away from it. But we're here at COP really to talk to people, to engage people in this conversation. So please reach out to us at AGU. Please reach out to me if you're interested in adding your voice to this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks. Just to follow up quickly, what's the time frame for the ethical framework, Susan?
So we are hoping that it'll be finished next fall.
Okay, and what are opportunities for people and countries to be involved in the process?
If I had slides here, I would have given you a QR code, but you can go to our AGU page, www.agu.org, and it'll be very easy to find. We have a white paper that's on this ethical framework, and you'll also see the broad coalition that we've been building in terms of our external advisory board members.
Thank you very much. And we'll have obviously time for questions at the end. Next, I'm happy to invite Monica Medina to come up to the stage. Monica has a long career in ocean conservation and policy and a range of other related subject matter, and she's currently the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental Scientific Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. And Monica, in these opening comments, I wanted to ask you a couple questions to see if you could respond to. I set the stage for why carbon removal is so necessary before you arrived, and why oceans might be able to play a role, and all of the sort of work that we need to do to answer that question. But I'd love if you could address, how does carbon removal currently fit into the U.S. Climate Action Plan, and where do you see the potential of oceans contributing to that agenda? And then more generally, what do you see as the role of government in helping to develop and de-risk technologies? And last, what are some of the most critical questions policymakers need to have answered on deployment? And I can come back to those if you don't have them all at once. But starting with how it fits into the U.S. government framework and the potential role of oceans.
Thanks, Brad, and it's very nice to be here. Thank you for hosting this and for asking such good questions. I am pleased to say that we are fitting ocean into our nationally determined contribution. Our biggest program is one that we rolled out this week. It's the Green Shipping Challenge. We've been busy trying to sign up more countries to be a part of that. We think that's a huge way that we can begin to make contributions from the ocean. And we know that the ocean has to provide some of the solutions. We're not going to get all the way where we need to go without at least 1/3 of the emissions reductions coming from nature-based solutions. And we know that the ocean is already a huge carbon sink, and so it needs to be and will be, I believe, part of the solution. We're just at the dawn of this. Honestly, I mean, when I think about what I've seen in terms of the development of it in the last year, you talked about the ethical framework. That's crucial. And we, the government, probably aren't in the best position to do that. But I do think it's a key thing. It's a key building block, and we need more of those building blocks. I had a meeting earlier this week with the CEO, one of the largest banks in the U.S., and they're keen to do more ocean investment. And what they need is to understand what the value of that investment is. And he urged us, the government, to help them come up with the strategies for developing that value. We have a price for carbon when it comes to forests and carbon removal. We don't have that really when it comes to ocean. And I think the price in forest is already, or right now is still a work in progress, shall we say. And so getting that right for oceans, I think we need to learn from what they've done in the forest sector, and we need to adapt it properly to oceans, which are different. It's not the same type of environment, if you will, but there are some overlaps. And I think about mangroves and coral reefs as the first places where we can put a value on the contribution they make for both climate and also for coastal resilience, for adaptation, and also for biodiversity. I wish there was a way to get triple credit, but we will, I think, see that these become more and more valuable and more sought after types of carbon strategies, carbon removal strategies. So to me, the government can do several things. We can help with that concessional finance that gets some of the deal dollars flowing into the ocean, if you will. We can help, and we're already seeing a little bit of that happen. There are some there are some deals that are very close to being done in the ocean that will be, I think, transformational, that will show people the value of these sorts of ocean transactions. And then I think the next thing we can do is help with creating the standards, creating the understanding of what the costs or the value is of oceans. We're in the process in the U.S. government of doing an accounting now and trying to change the way people think. It's even more than just dollars. It's really changing the way people think about nature. We've always taken it for granted. The ocean has been especially a place that we take for granted. It's been a sort of a free-for-all in a lot of ways, in that there is an awful lot of activity in the ocean, but there isn't a single regulatory structure. The high seas have some regulation, but not of everything. So we need a lot more governance and more consistent and coherent governance in the ocean in order to create the value that we need. But I take optimism in is that little countries like Niue have come up with a prospectus and are working hard now to raise funds for their own ocean conservation through a round. They're trying to raise funds for ocean conservation and have put this prospectus out. They launched it at the Pacific Islands Forum. I think you'll see more island governments looking for ways to do the same thing.
Thank you for that. So I just want to ask one follow-on question. So we're talking, about carbon removal, so complete cleanup of carbon pollution from the atmosphere and the upper layer of the ocean. There's a range of these potential technology and nature-inspired pathways. They need massive testing at field scales, and the private sector can't lead that work for many reasons, one of which is just sheer cost, but secondly, the government needs to be involved in helping de-risk this, just like in many other sectors. Do you see this on the agenda for the U.S. government?
I think so. It's not the most immediate thing on our agenda, but it is on the horizon. I think we need to see these technologies proven. We need to take it slowly. There is no reason to do further damage to the ocean in service to trying to save it from climate change. So I do think we need to approach all of these solutions with a fair amount of precaution and a show-me attitude. And so it's very early on in those stages. But I will say there are other proven technologies like oyster beds and coral reefs and mangroves that we can lean into now. And you'll see that happening in some of our current nature-based solution work and adaptation work.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite up Isabella Teixeira. And Isabella is currently the co-chair of the International Resource Panel under the UN Environment Program. But she's also the former Environment Minister for Brazil. And given the change in government, who knows what might happen next. So, Isabella, I wanted to ask you specifically about, Monica spoke about the governance frameworks that are going to need to be in place. Again, we're only talking about research and development, not deployment. But even research and development requires governance and frameworks. What do you think are some of the international policy frameworks that might work to help govern the research around ocean-based pathways for carbon removal? And do you see any opportunities for countries like Brazil to be leading in this space? And also, what do you think we need to do to build momentum around some of these research and development efforts in the Global South?
Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear myself. Yes. Thank you very much. Invite me, my honor to join you today. Okay, as a political player and an outside player, I try to mix my answer here. The first thing is ocean must be part of the solutions. Today, you want to be part of the problems. And this is, when you go into the political arrangements to tackle climate change, I was the head of Brazilian delegation in Paris Agreement. And it's impressive when you go into the pledge for mitigation and to run ambition, ocean not part of the equation. We need new lands to make sure that the decision process, the policymakers, and also business leaders understand the role of the oceans, considering not only carbon capture, but also economic development based on low carbon economies. You don't have a strategy, I don't know, robust strategies, economic strategies to promote low carbon economies based on oceans. We know a lot about agriculture, we know a lot about economy of biomass, we know a lot about energy transition. There's no ocean transition when you go into climate world. And this is really important because we need new lands who have a strategic momentum today in the world to make sure that we will be able not to address solutions, but we need scalability to manage the solutions. And then to go into this, based on my experience, I'm sorry, it's so noisy, it's unbelievable. This is unhealthy, but let's do it. When you go into the political world, when you go into the decision process, things must make sense for people. And science is coming after the spoiler of a global crisis. No, and then I will, hey, it's good. You don't need this for ocean defense. But I think that when you go into this crisis now that we have in the world, science came as considered the COVID pandemic. It was a spoiler of what global crisis means. And we need to also consider the scientist's role, political scientist's role, to make sense that you can move the pieces really fast in such a way that you can take decisions considering climate change and also oceans. When I discuss a situation as my country, when you have the situation in Brazil as my country, we're absolutely visible considering Amazon forest, but never we discuss Atlantic Ocean, and you have a coast zone in more than 8,000 kilometers. And 85% of Brazilian population lives in cities, and almost 9 of the 85 lives along the coastline. It's very interesting that we can discuss Amazon region and tropical forest. This is also important, but you cannot see how oceans is part of our lives and how we need to understand the dimensions of the challenge that we have to protect oceans and also to have oceans as nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions politically is an open political concept. We need to understand this. Everyone, I always like to say that to have this momentum in the world, that everyone is talking or discussing about the green wishing, not greenwashing, green wishing, everyone wants to be green. We need to move from green wishing to green doing without greenwashing, but nobody knows indeed what it means. Okay, when we go into oceans, we need to understand how we can provide scientific knowledge to have scalability. Without this, it's impossible to convince people that we are part of the solution. And I'm confident that a country like Brazil, that now is back, okay, now democracy is back, that we should come together to make sure how to bring forests and oceans together, consider biodiversity and climate change, connecting agenda. We cannot face or tackle climate change or the triple planetary crisis without connecting the right dots. And what it means, When you have to bring climate with hunger and education, for example. Ocean is part of this equation. When you go into the inequalities, everyone's like to discuss today, it's important to discuss social inequalities, but we need to understand also environmental inequalities, because we have societies that could not access environmental resource. When you go into International Resource Panel, we relaunch the second report of our flagship by 2024, the Global Resource Outlook. The big picture is so worse about the condition of natural resources in the world. So we need to understand how to connect the dots, and I think that the big challenge that we have here when we go into the ocean, how oceans indeed will allow us to connect faster these dots and to share solutions, share trajectories, come together into different governments, different societies. My last point here politically. For scientists, we need to understand the new dynamics of international cooperation. It's not anymore only North and South. We have Western and Eastern world coming. The South-South cooperation is really important and strategic platform, political, geopolitical ones, and geoeconomic ones, to emerge scientific and also to allow people to take better decisions. Oceans are part of this. We cannot see the East world, for example, the oceans that we have as only part of the geopolitical dispute that used to have the last 100 or 200 years. We need to bring this based on hope, and this understand that we are able to provide solutions. And to provide solutions based on international cooperation, not only between the states, but the governments, but among society. I'm confident that if science comes with able to provide really knowledge, but with scalability, and also allow us to propose innovative business model, you can bring oceans, not only as a solution, but in my opinion, as really a protagonic role to make sense that we can connect biodiversity and climate change and also solve pollution crisis in different perspectives. So we need new lands, and to have ambition, we need to lands to bring people together, but more than this, be sure that you need to connect development, the South, because you have the assets, natural assets, and you need to change our way to approach the problem. Let's move to the solutions and let's come together. This, I think, is a powerful message that scientists must come now. Make sure that we can connect, as you mentioned, our cooperation, but more than this, bring people that are co-responsible for solutions, not co-responsible for the problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was an excellent statement, and it was a perfect segue to our next speaker, Philip Tigo, who is currently the strategic advisor to the presidency of Kenya on climate issues, and also, and more importantly for this particular conversation, leading the African department of the Global Partnership for Carbon Removal, which is a global partnership that is being stood up by the South with tremendous leadership from Kenya, and I think speaks exactly to the point you were just making, Isabella, about this need for leadership from the South. So, Philip, can you talk a little bit about the global partnership and why Kenya has decided to become such a strong leader in this space, and what you see as the role of the partnership in doing some of the things that Isabella just spoke about?
Thank you so much, Brad. Always a pleasure. I think, first of all, I'm not the climate guy. I'm the innovation person. I don't want to be fired. No problem. Basically, I think the presidency in Kenya, and for those of us who've been seeing our leadership over the last couple of years, is that we've been very much central to, beyond just climate, to the oceans conversation. So Kenya, as you know, is part of the Oceans Panel. I think you'll be happy to know that we just joined the Oceans Pledge 1 hour ago with the US. So there's something new bring around the Oceans Pledge. But I think if you look at, and we're right, Kenya is one of the least polluters, as you know. We 0.000, and we don't even want to go into the zeros. But again, unlike any other period where we are just waiting for something to happen, we decided to be proactive. And the idea that we need to be part of the solution means we can bring in innovative ideas. And so Kenya has basically a multi-stakeholder mindset, and I like that Secretary Molina mentioned this. that it is a whole of portfolio approach and it's a whole of society approach. Civil society, private sector, governments, and communities. In our case, coastal communities, and this is the mindset, have always been thought as lazy. Coastal communities are where we holiday a lot, and so they've never been included in anything. And so even ocean-based economies are not part of anything bigger. And so for us, having come out of an interesting constitutional conversation in 2010, started recognizing that if you really have to build society, then it must be inclusive, not tokenism. It must be participatory. And so when the voices and visions of persons in the coast are neglected, then we know our whole of portfolio approach will suffer. So as much as we're looking at natural means of carbon removal, which is of course forests, we also are looking at oceans quite critically. And so leading the partnership is a no-brainer. And so for us, at the margins of the World Economic Forum, we launched this global partnership with global management and partners like yourselves, South Pole and the rest, was to galvanize global action around one agenda setting. And so for Kenya, we actually put up a UN resolution last year around carbon removal because it was never there, even in the United Nations. And so this year, you'll see us going full force, next year, you'll see us going full force on that, even just to bring it into the common knowledge of fluency that people are actually having that conversation. And the whole of portfolio approach, natural and technological means, including oceans. The part, of course, of the carbon removal partnership is the normative standards. And I think it's been mentioned here around standards. And so how do we also ensure that we harmonize standards? But also, I had other concepts. For us, beyond ethics, it's also transparency. Because we've seen the carbon prices for forests. It doesn't work for us. And so if we're going to create new standards for oceans, then we must actually ensure that they're transparent. So at the moment, we are having a very big conversation with, for example, supply chain transparency. And this is something that we'll be bringing out in the US Africa Summit in about 4 weeks. The third part, of course, is solutions. It's good to talk about normative standards and agenda setting, but where are these solutions? And are these solutions accessible and available and affordable for people, especially in the global south? And so that's really something that we're looking at, and that's why we are leading this. The first announcement is, of course, we love COP, but my president is very clear. We need action. And so we've announced, or he's announced, a climate action summit in June of next year in Kenya. And oceans is one work stream. And so that announcement, look out for an announcement from Kenya, an invitation. And it's everybody, it's just not governments, it's gonna be everybody else. As you know, he is also the chair of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate. And so he'll be doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. That is really good to hear. And we've all been inspired by the leadership of the government of Kenya in creating the partnership and in moving it forward. Just one follow-up. You spoke about agenda setting as one of the most important parts of the partnership. What is the agenda on carbon removal that you'd like to see adopted by a consortium of governments, let's say, or ultimately by the UN? Do you have a sense of what the agenda would look like?
I think the first agenda, as we've said, in terms of agenda setting, is also recognizing that carbon removal as a third pillar, right? Because adaptation mitigation, we agree, but again, it's a whole of portfolio approach. We need removals as part of that as a third pillar. Of course, as part of restoration, but removals, as we've seen and as per your PowerPoint. I think for us, that's what is critical. The second agenda, of course, is just the whole issue of transparency and fairness. That countries of the global south that emit less are actually part of the conversation of setting the standards, but also the rates. The third bit is financing, right? And you've mentioned ocean. I mean, we are not seeing any investments coming into the ocean. So can we also become a little bit serious around investments, both in country, but also across the international sector? The fourth part, of course, is the institutional frameworks. And that is something that in Kenya we're taking very seriously. So for the first time, as the president was arranging this government, is we have a dedicated ministry and a high-level official around the blue economy and oceans. Previously, we didn't have this. It was somewhere buried in on agriculture and fisheries. So that is the signaling we're sending. The second signaling, of course, is the president has put up what we call a climate change council. And we have a secretary for climate change, and oceans is one of his deliverables. And I think he'll be the oceans sharper. So again, high-level support. So if we can see that signaling across governments, because sometimes you really need that, because we work very closely with the US government. I think President Barack used to say, it was quite an interesting thing that he said, this sort of high-level political cover. You kind of need that. And so if we see that running across governments, then I think that will be important.
Thank you. Great. So last but definitely not least, and I should have said in the beginning, unfortunately, the Minister of the Environment from Chile, who was going to lead off this session, is called away to the loss and damage negotiations, which apparently have accelerated and intensified in terms of time. So she was unable to make it, but we're very fortunate to have Dr. Jose Miguel Benavente, who is the Executive Vice President of the Chilean Production Development Corporation. He's with the delegation here, but he's also representing more of a private sector view, and not a private sector view, more of an innovation view. But I wanted to ask you about what you think the economic opportunities are here, even just in the research and development phase, because in order to test all of these different approaches at a scale that is climate relevant, it's going to take a lot of people doing a lot of work. And then ultimately, regardless of what carbon removal pathways we choose, oceans, terrestrial combination, that 100 to 1,000 gigatons will represent the largest single cleanup in human history, unparalleled, and obviously is going to take a lot of human engagement in it. And I'm curious as to what you see as the role of innovation, organizations like yours, and again, the Global South.
Well, thank you very much, Brad, for the invitation. And again, I mean, I'm excusing the Minister Maisa Roja. She couldn't come to be with you today because of you already mentioned why there. But let me go to answer one of your questions, which is the enabling framework that we're thinking in Chile in these days, and how it's linked to the problem that you already raised. And further, we can go through the solutions. What we're trying to implement in Chile is what we call the mission-oriented innovation policy. Okay? One of the main characteristics about this mechanism, which is new for the Chilean standards, if you need missions. Okay? And what are those missions? What are the characteristics of those missions, which I think is very relevant for this discussion? The first one is that the missions arise normally when you have a crisis, a heavy crisis. And this is very important to have it, because in this case it's very clear which is the crisis. The second one is the solution for the crisis. The benefits of the solution of the crisis is a citizen. It's not the scientist, and not the entrepreneurs, and not particular areas of society. It's citizens itself. And this is very relevant. Why is that relevant? Because normally the solutions for this kind of environment takes long time. And governments only last for 4 years in the case of Chile. So the only ones who can avoid the consistency problems are citizens who realize, and this is the third challenge, is how citizens know that this is a crisis and is a relevant problem for their life. Probably scientists are very aware. Some of people who are sitting here are very aware. But it's true that people from Brazil or Chile who live inland, for example, are aware that this is a crisis, and the solution of the crisis may affect their lives. The third characteristic about the missions is the solutions are not only provided by one sector or by one technology. And so it's a multitasking, a multidisciplinary, a solution that you have. And the fourth one is very relevant, is this is not only a public issue in terms of the source of the solutions, and not only a scientist, it's only also, as you already mentioned, the private sector may participate in the development of the solutions, where they can see some economic value, and it's very relevant to see which are the economic value that can take, but also it's an environmental value and a social value as well. So we're moving in that direction in Chile to put this framework with a mission-oriented innovation policy. And now I think what is the challenge for us in Chile is how to structure a mission in terms of the problem that we're facing today. For example, one of the characteristics of these missions is first, you have a time frame to accomplish it. And second one, you have a metric to know if you fulfill the challenge. And I think one of the problems against this is you're seen as a moving target. And when you have a moving target, it's very difficult. You can think on that as a challenge, but not a mission, you see? So you need to structure in a mission in terms you have a time frame when you want to end and finish this problem, and you need a metric, okay? Very clear metric. So I think for the case of we're now speaking, at least in the case of Chile, is how you structure the problem now we're facing, taking carbon from the oceans and structure as a mission where we know it's a crisis, how people are involved and how they benefit to, to tackle, put a time frame, put, a metric, how do we solve it? And then one of the challenges, at least for Latin American countries, is how to coordinate this effort. We are doing this in other dimensions related with water and related with green hydrogen. But now this one could be a very interesting one. Part of the challenge for us is to structure in a mission and to coordinate the effort from the public with the public, which is very relevant for countries like us, the way we organize, in pillars that we don't speak each other. So it's a scientific problem, yes. It's an innovation problem, yes. It's a regulatory problem, yes. And the Minister of and Environment have a very role to play. So we have to sit in a table and coordinate the effort together with the private sector and together with the, the social society organized in a certain different way. So I think this is a pretty case, pretty interesting case for in a Chilean case to structure its mission. And we as a government today, we're trying to move the agenda of innovation, science and technology based on this mission. It's not exclusive, but it's adding what we're already doing, beforehand.
Thank you very much. That was, I found that very interesting. Following up on one thing you said, that innovation can take a long time, but governments keep changing. How do you see the role of potentially something like the Global Partnership or some kind of an international organization? Is there a place that that should be leading on this agenda that doesn't keep changing? Should it be the UNFCCC? Should it be some other body? Do you have any ideas on how we are able to sustain this through governmental change?
Because I don't know exactly, how this all organized, so I don't know. But this is another very relevant issue which the international agenda may influence and avoid this time inconsistency problem. One is the citizens themselves, when they now have the idea, how important is this, and part of the role that we have to play is to make, attention and people aware about this situation, but sometimes it's hidden, and sometimes we are aware, but not all the citizens. Secondly, these international agencies may help not only to make this awareness effort, but also in a certain way to push the governments to maintain, while they change through time, to maintain this line of efforts, because have to be consistent through time to give results. You're not going to solve this in 4 years, which is normally a government lasts, at least in most Latin American countries. So you have to go through. The other ones who are trying to avoid the time inconsistency is scientists. They also, but they have the interest, which is fine, okay? But I mean, and also the private sector. So the international institution also may help, in a certain way to avoid this and to push the countries, especially Chile, for oceans are very, very relevant, to maintain these policies in the long run, these missions, and go forward for them to at least avoid this problem of time inconsistency.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I'd love to give anybody in the audience the opportunity, if anybody has a question or a comment, before I can keep asking questions as well, but I'd love to see if anybody wants to ask anything.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and I only started learning about the importance of oceans in like the last 2 years or so, and partly through the work that Brad does. How do we get the word out so that your frameworks can get through whatever hurdles they need to get easier, so people can do things on a daily basis to protect the oceans, just reducing plastic usage, damaging chemicals. When 8 billion people come together to take action and take care of our oceans, we can be much more effective.
Did you want to add one?
No, I don't think that's a contradiction at all. I mean, there are certain opportunities related with the mission that the private sector can provide solutions, where they create value not for their own, for all, but they can create value for everyone. And while doing this, they can have access, for example, technology, produce technology, and then can use that technology to provide solution not only for one country, and then you can spread to another countries. So, I mean, I don't see any contradiction. There's some role for the scientists to the knowledge, information, the basic research, which is fine. But also the private sector can act, even searching for their own benefit. They provide benefits socially. So I think there's no contradiction, at least what I think, related with these missions.
All right, I would just add one more thought on that. As this ultimately scales, whether on land or sea or both, the idea of public utility might be a really interesting model, because this is a global public good. And while there should be absolutely a commercial element to it, just like public utilities, that can also be regulated by government. With that, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you. Thank all of you for coming, and wish you all the best as you go forward.